Wow. Thanks for coming. How can I top that? Thank you very much, Jeremy, and congratulations on 16 years. That's really an incredible run yourself, so thank you for your own public service. I don't like the word politics. I like to think of myself as a public servant, and that's what I've been doing more of. And Jeremy asked me if I would talk about the day in the life of a state representative, and I was looking at Sally Vincent in the back, who for several years worked for Denny Duffin when he represented Lenox and what is now my district now, God, 40 years ago. It's hard to believe time has gone by to have a state representative from Lenox who I knew growing up. He served with my dad on the Board of Selectmen for a number of years. So Sally should be up here too, talking about the day in the life of a state representative and how it's changed in the last 40 years. So thank you very much, Jeremy, for inviting me to be here. It's really quite honored. I just want to correct a couple of things. I started in politics probably the day I was born because that's when my father was heavily involved. So running for office myself actually started in 1985 when I ran for the Lenox Planning Board, and I lost. It was the greatest experience of my life, was losing an election. I'm 19-1 since, so I think I'm doing okay. But I think I learned an awful lot by losing an election. I think a lot of people take things for granted. And I remember George Bush, when he was asked, how does it feel to be having the same name as a very popular father? And he said, I remember long ago that I inherited 50% of my father's friends and 100% of his enemies. So I actually ran against a longtime incumbent on the Lenox Planning Board at that time in 1985. And I won like 2-1 in what we call the caucuses or the primaries. And I remember the Berkshire Eagle did a little editorial, or the in brief, when they did the in briefs, they talked about Smitty Pignatelli, the heir apparent to the Pignatelli dynasty. 6 weeks later, I lost 2-1 in the May election, but I say to this day, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because I knew I needed to build a team. I couldn't do it on my own. I couldn't run on my name alone, and I was going to have to build a team to be successful. And when I ran 2 years later for the planning board, and Jeremy just talked about the whole lineage there, you can't do it by yourself. All politics is local. I'm a great believer of Tip O'Neill's books of All Politics is Local. And he talked to a woman that after he got elected, and who he had known his entire life. And he asked her, he says, well, thank you very much. Did you vote for me? And she said, no. He says, well, why not? You've known me my whole life. She says, you never asked. So the politics today is you have to ask. You should never take anything for granted, never assume anybody's going to vote for you. And I realized when I won that first election, everybody voted for me, according to them. So 5 years later, I ran for selectman. It was a hotly contested race. And my dad was on the board as well. And I think some people in Lenox were very concerned to have two Pignatellis on the same board of selectmen at the same time, thinking we're going to be voting as a block, having 40% of the vote. And I won by 106 votes. How many people, show of hands, can tell you who I beat? There's only two people that know who won that election, me and the guy that I beat. But I'll never forget, when you voted a couple weeks ago, you have to stand, candidates have to stand about 150 feet away from the polling entrance. It was a cold, rainy, raw May day. So Loretta Bosworth, God rest her soul, was the town clerk. She saw both of us standing out there at the polls, and she let us stand in the town hall, believe it or not, which would be a total violation today, but in that front entranceway, that little airlock. And we were both there, walking in and out. I wasn't going to leave unless my opponent left, and he was determined not to leave unless I left. So around 3:30 that afternoon, he said, I'm going to go home and change. Okay, no problem. I stuck it out. I won that election by 46 votes. And what I've done every time since, and this is why it's so important for people to be voting, I went into the town clerk's office the next day. I asked the town clerk, can you show me the voters list? I wanted to see who voted and who didn't vote. And I started checking names off of people that I felt I could count on that failed to show up. One of them was my cousin. I called him up, full disclosure, on TV now, but cousin Nikki. I said, Nikki, how come you didn't vote yesterday? He said, oh, I thought it was me, no problem, not a big deal. Thought you were going to win, no problem. I was late for a tennis match. I stopped at 46. I never, from that day forward, ever wanted to be the one who lost by 46 votes and counted 46 or 47 people that he felt you could count on, including relatives. So I've done that religiously ever since. Even in my, Southern Berkshire races, I always go into the Lenox Town Hall to see who voted and who didn't vote. And very proud to say one year I got 99% of the vote in the town of Lenox running for state representative. I'm very proud of that fact. I think there was 32 people that voted against me. I didn't need to go see Libby Bosworth. I could tell you 15 of them just by being in this business as long as you can. But public service. I don't like to be called a politician. I'd rather be called a public servant. I really believe that's what I've been all about. I saw it at a very early age when I went to work for my father when I was 11 years old. And I saw the joy that my father got with being in a position to help other people. I saw this every summer, year after year after year. And he was elected county commissioner, and I would travel around with the county commission and go into the county courthouse and talk to people. And I saw the joy that my dad got with being in a position to help other people. I said, I want to do something. I never had any aspirations to run for elected office, but I knew I wanted to do something to make Lenox special. So I volunteered. I was on an energy committee when I was 19 years old during the energy crunch to try to help people, especially seniors who are struggling to pay their heating bills with weatherization and things like that. I was on the Affordable Housing Committee long before it became fashionable to talk about affordable housing in the town of Lenox or anywhere else. We were trying to find ideas to try to make sure that Lenox maintained the affordability for older people or for younger people. So it was in my DNA. And then somebody talked me into running for planning board. And I've been a state representative for 22 years. The greatest experience I had in elected office to be where I am today was not a county commissioner, was not a selectman, it was planning board. When you're on the planning board, it forces you to kind of work with colleagues, learn how to work with developers and other folks on how to shape and massage things so it's beneficial for, they want to make money, but we want to make sure it's beneficial to the town of Lenox. The greatest experience I have to be where I am today was on the Lenox Planning Board. And I tell that to people all the time. They think I'm crazy to say that. And then 5 years later, Judge Derry, God rest his soul, decided that he was not going to run for re-election. And my dad told me when I was younger that all politics is about timing. Well, it was an open seat. My dad was on the board. He discouraged me from running, but I felt it was the right time. So I ran and I won. My father's my hero, and he learned and probably saw firsthand the sacrifices that your family especially makes in this crazy life of politics. My father discouraged me from running for every single seat I ever ran for. But once I made that decision, became my biggest cheerleader. He knew what it meant, and in hindsight, as I look back and try to reflect on nearly 40 years in elected office and 22 years in the legislature, driving back and forth to Boston, I've seen, sadly, what my family has given up. And I'm going to try to rectify that, and that was part of my decision after my mom and dad passed away within 29 days of each other 5 years ago. I started to look at things a little bit differently, and I said, you know what, I've had a good run. I think we've done some good work, but it's time to start shifting gears, and I called it a pivot because I still want to work. I just don't want to be in elected office any longer. Someone came up to me and said, that pivot's not a good word. I said, what should I use? He says, how about a reinvention? So I'm calling my pivot now a reinvention, and they asked me what you're reinventing. I said, I don't know yet. I've offered to help out with the town of Lenox as the interim town manager, but I want to do something. I'm 65 years old. I don't feel 65. I feel I still have the energy to try to do some good things, and I want to continue to do things. But I'm tired of driving back and forth to Boston. I figure I put over 1 million miles on my car, not the same car. But it's time to move on. And I remember Steve Grossman. Steve Grossman was our longtime state treasurer. And he called me in February when I announced I wasn't running. And he said, I'm sorry to see you leave. You've done a great job, but you're smart. You're smart to leave while people want more of you, instead of the politicians who stay too long when people want less of them. So I feel like I've been on kind of a farewell tour of the last 6 or 7 months. Every town in this district, it's unbelievable. Even the towns that I used to represent but no longer represent have held special events or functions for me and special recognition. I'm very almost embarrassed by it, almost humbled by it, but I feel that I've made a difference in their lives. And I've told people all the time that I've never ever intended to solve the world's problems, but I was committed to solving your problem of the day. And that's really what I felt I was going to do. And I think I've done that pretty well. So Jeremy asked me, what is it like the day in the life of a state representative? After 22 years, I still don't know. Because every day is different. Every day is different. You know, driving back and forth to Boston, I used to be able to do it in 2 hours and 2 hours and 15 minutes. Now it's like 2.5 to 3 hours based on the traffic. It feels like a NASCAR race sometimes with the speeding traffic, but every day is different. We had our last formal session last Thursday, and we passed a climate bill, which I think is going to make some huge differences as we try to attack the climate issue. We did an economic development bill. This year we did a $5.3 billion housing bill. I think there's going to be tremendous opportunities to try to make that, I don't like the phrase affordable housing. I like housing affordability. I think it changes the narrative and changes the stigma that people may have about affordable housing. So just flip those two words, and I think it's going to be beneficial. I was able to buy my first house when I was 19 years old. My parents helped me with the down payment. My mortgage with taxes in the town of Lenox was $350 a month. I was scared to death. I was working 3 jobs, 7 days a week, 3 nights a week, just to pay a $350 a month mortgage. Fast forward to today, the average home is what, $560,000. How can a young 19-year-old or 29-year-old or even 39-year-old seriously think about affording a house in Lenox? And that's why I think the opportunity, I serve on the Housing Trust Committee as well, and I think we're the first town in the county that actually has a first-time home buyers grant. We will award up to $20,000. So I'll give you an example of my son. My son is now 35. When he was 30, he bought his first house in the town of Lee. It's an older house, needs some work. Knock on wood, I was in a position to help him with the down payment. The local bank gave him a $15,000 grant, which all community banks do that. That $15,000 grant today would be $25,000 or $30,000. So those are the things that are changing, that we're making investments. And it's a grant. It's not a loan. He kept that house for 5 years. He no longer has to pay that back to the local bank. So what we're doing in Lenox is similar to that. So a combination of the town stepping up, the bank stepping up, families hopefully can step up to make a difference. My son's mortgage with taxes and insurance is $950 a month. Heck of a lot more than my first mortgage. But when you look at what rentals are going for today, we're looking at $1,500 to $3,000 a month. The only way to change people's narrative is to help them build wealth and equity. The only way to do that, in my opinion, is to own something. If you can afford a $3,000 a month rent, even with the interest rates today, you could afford a $300,000 mortgage. And if we had a really sophisticated down payment program or first home buyer assistance program like Lenox has, you could technically buy. I'd rather give you $100,000 than spending what is on average $500,000 to $600,000 per unit to build an apartment. And that's what we're dealing with Penrose development up at the Brushwood Farm. It's going to be some affordable housing units, $500,000 to $600,000 per unit to rent, to build, so you can rent it for $3,000. Imagine what I could do if I could give 5 people $100,000 to actually buy something. That's what's going to change the narrative. So I'm a big fan of home ownership. Some people want to rent. I understand that. We got to have the combination of home ownership, rentals. and things like that. Co-op apartments maybe. Just build some equity and change the narrative a little bit. I think that's how we can change this focus, because I was one of 5 kids in my family, and my parents helped me with the down payment, and then I thought I was the smartest guy in Lenox, because 5 years later I sold that very house for $80,000. I thought I was a smart guy. Then the housing market kicked off. The people I sold it to sold it for $120,000, and today it's probably worth $400,000. Man, I wish I kept that house. I'd have no mortgage. I'd be a wealthy man. But the point is, times are changing, and we have to do our part. I don't like politics. I like public service, and I've had a good run. I don't feel I have no regrets, no second thoughts, but I don't enjoy the politics that's going on today. I see it even at the local level, which is unfortunate. We're all friends, we're neighbors. You know, the narrative has changed so much. The 24-hour, 7-day-a-week cycle of social media and people feeling empowered to say and do whatever they want is really disheartening in many ways. I remember tagging along with my dad when he was campaigning, and it was about my father and his opponents. What were they all about? And now it's about your family, or you're a divorced person, or this happened when you were younger. And I think those are the issues that I don't enjoy anymore, because I think those are the sacrifices that families have to make. And why would you want to expose yourself? Anybody not have a skeleton in their closet? Please raise your hand. You know, we all do. We all do. They just haven't found the key to my closet yet. But the point is, we all do. And years ago, you were based on the substance of the ideas that you're bringing forward to run for office. And now it's personal. Now it's about your wife or your sister or your sibling or your cousin that maybe did something wrong. I've been saying for 30 years now, the only class I ever got kicked out of in high school was 9th grade French by my mother. So I was trying to be an open book right from the get-go, and it's a true story. The only class I ever got kicked out was by my mom in 9th grade French. She thought I was being disruptive. So it's an open book when you run for public office, but I think the media scrutiny and the social media scrutiny, I think, is getting very difficult, and I think we're discouraging people from running for office. And sometimes when the quality people decide not to run for office, I can make more money in the private sector. I can be home on the weekends with my family and not go into a rubber chicken dinner in some small town in Berkshire County on a Saturday night in March. I can be home with my family. Good quality people are choosing not to be involved in public service or government any longer. So you know what happens? The JV team wins. The JV team runs, and the JV team wins. And I think we're seeing that in Washington, D.C. right now. The JV team is taking control. And I think that's what concerns me about the politics going forward. And that's why I like to come full circle back to Lenox. All politics is local, and anybody in this town that doesn't think they can make a difference is foolish to think that way. Get involved. Some people get involved in elected office like I have, but of my 5 siblings, my oldest sister, Donna, she worked in Washington for her whole career on Capitol Hill, and she retired after 8 years in the Obama White House. My other siblings have all done something to be involved in this community, but I was the only knucklehead that ran for office and put their name on the ballot. But you can make a difference at the local level by getting involved. It could be helping the neighbor across the street, volunteering at the community center. The town is in desperate needs of volunteers to be on some of our public boards, whether it be planning board, zoning board, conservation restriction. There's plenty of opportunities for people to get involved and feel that you've made a difference. But there's no typical day as a state rep. I would get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always wanted to read 2 or 3 newspapers. I never wanted to be surprised at the coffee shop or getting a local newspaper by something that was going on in town or in the district that I wasn't aware of. So I would kind of brief myself before I got on the road. I would try to get to the State House at 9:30, 9:45 every morning. And I found out the later I left, the earlier I got there. So I would leave at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'd pull in the parking lot at 9:30, 9:45. Well, I started bringing my kids to school, dropping them off at 7:30, 7:45, getting on the road, And I pull in the garage at 9:30, quarter of 10. So you just got to figure out when you're going and when you're leaving. Coming home, if I didn't get out of there before 4 o'clock, you're better off staying until about 7. Now, if you don't get out of there before 2 o'clock, and I'm thinking, doesn't anybody work anymore? They just drive up and down that turnpike. That's all they do. But we've done some good things. But some of my most proud moments in that State House are the things that most of you probably have never heard about, nor will ever hear about. But I'll tell you one story. There was a young woman in Lenox, single mom. She was a paralegal for a local office, and father was really not in the picture at all. 2 kids, and she called me up and she says, "Smitty, can you come over to the house?" I said, "Yeah, sure. What's up?" She said, "I'm having issues with my son." I said, "Okay." I went over to see him, and she had 2 pictures. He grew up in Lenox, went to school in Lee, and played football. A stunningly handsome young boy. The photo she showed me was in his football uniform. And I said, "Oh yeah, how's he doing? Looks great." And then he showed me another picture. And the picture was like if mom or dad snapped a picture with you when you just got out of bed in the morning. Your eyes were half shut, your hair was all a mess. And I chuckled initially, but then I quickly realized that's why she invited me over here. That's why, what's going on? Full-blown heroin addict at 19. Star football player at 17, heroin addict at 19. I said, "What can I do to help?" She says, "Well, the doctor has identified this little pill that would suppress his urges for drugs. The doctor's recommending 4 pills a day." Okay, so what's the big deal? Well, Mass Health won't cover it. Each pill costs $10. So you do the math, $10 a pill, 4 pills a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. This paraprofessional was maybe at that time making $11,000 or $12,000 a year, was not able to do that. Well, I went to work on Mass Health. We now have them covering, it's called methadone. 20 years ago, it was unheard of. It wasn't legislation I filed. It was just advocacy that said we're trying to help these people, and now methadone is a prescribed medication to curb drug addiction. About 4 months later, at 8:30 at night at the State House, my phone rings. And it's a horrible habit I have. When the phone rings, I tend to answer it. So I picked up the phone, and I go, "Hello, this is Smitty." He goes, "Oh, is this Representative Pignatelli?" And it was a young man that I helped. And I promise you, he was calling the State House at 8:30 at night on a Tuesday night, thinking he's going to get a voicemail. He got me. And he said to me, he says, "I just wanted to call you to tell you thank you for saving my life." Now, I got a little choked up, to be very honest with you. And I said, "Don't thank me. Thank your mother. You've treated her horribly for the last several years, but she never gave up on you. And do me a favor. Years from now, don't be afraid to share your story." 6 months later, I'm driving back from Pittsfield back to Lenox, and I see this person on the side of the road at the bus stop. And oh my God, I look like so-and-so. I did a U-turn, came around. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm waiting for the bus to get back to Lenox." I hopped in, I drove him back home. I said, "What are you doing now?" He says, "Well, I just came from BCC. I'm re-enrolling in BCC to try to better himself." Now, drug addiction, like alcohol abuse, it's a daily grind. It doesn't just end, "Oh, hey, I'm all cured now, I'm sober and everything's good." The young man is still struggling a little bit, but we gave him an opportunity to better himself. And every time I see his mother, she just gives me a big hug, and she says, "I can never thank you enough." I don't need to have thanks. But I couldn't send a press release to Clarence Fanto, "Smitty Pignatelli saves the life of a drug addict." It's not who I am, it's not what I do, but it's what a good state representative does. And that's why I've had 3 opportunities to run for the state senate in my 22 years. All 3 times I have chosen not to. I loved being in the House. I loved being your representative. And I was so afraid by taking it to another level with a much larger district that I would lose that ability to connect with you more personally. And I chose to stay where I am, and I have no regrets of that whatsoever. I try to tell my colleagues, in fact, I try to tell the new Representative-elect Lee Davis, when you represent the largest district in the House of Representatives, you have to understand, you have to pay attention to the people's needs. And she didn't really understand that initially when I first talked to her. And I said, when you represent one community, it's a piece of cake, as far as I'm concerned. I could be a rock star if I only represented one community. Because when you're representing one community or a city, state representatives are like the third or fourth rung on the ladder. She said, what do you mean by that? So you call your city councilor. You call your councilor at large. You call the mayor. If all else fails, you call your state rep. There's many, many people in my district who I wish I trademarked this phrase, #call Smitty. People would call me for things that I said, that's more of a local issue. I can't get involved in those things. You got to call your DPW superintendent, call your board of selectmen. I don't know who they are, but my neighbor said, call Smitty. And that's what I've tried to do. They're not the sexiest topics in the world, but the reception I've been given since I announced I wasn't running for office, I think is pretty overwhelming, and I think I've impacted people's lives more than I actually realized. We have some big challenges here going forward. I think we've tackled a lot of good things over the last 22 years, but I learned from my dad as well when he announced he wasn't running, the work never ends. It's just time for someone else to pick up the ball while Smitty reinvents himself, but it's a new chapter. So I was telling Sally and Jeff Vincent when I got down there, for probably the first 10 or 12 years, where are you from? I'd say the Berkshires. Where in the Berkshires? I'd say Lenox. They asked about Denny Duffin. They didn't ask about my predecessor. They asked about the guy who was there 2 people ago, Denny Duffin. That's how beloved he was and the reputation he had down there. It was really quite incredible. A guy who lived in Lenox, who commuted every single day. He made a promise to his wife that he would be home every night. And I've gotten in my car, the first 4 years I commuted every day. I've gotten in my car at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I would come home, drive my kids to school, get back on the road. Can anybody honestly tell me that if I missed your call on that day and I called you at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, hey Jeff, sorry I missed your call, but hey, I'm just getting the message now, click. I feared I'm not doing myself any favors, I'm not doing you any favors, and I'm physically destroying my body and my car at the same time. So I'm much more selective now. Elise, the rock star woman in my life, lives in Boston, so once in a while if I behave, she lets me stay at her house, which is always good. But Denny Duffin, they asked about Denny Duffin, and imagine, I want to ask you guys, beyond Denny Duffin, when I said I was from Lenox, what's the very first thing people said? Oh, Tanglewood? Anybody else? No. Believe it or not, Eastover. Far and away, Eastover Resort. And this is what I've been advocating for the 22 years in the legislature is Boston people tend to be more north-south travelers. New Hampshire, Maine, Cape or Rhode Island. We only market to the New York metropolitan market. But Eastover, back in the 70s, were marketing Boston. Singles weekends, couples weekends, fire departments. I mean, they drew people out here, but it was Eastover, far and away, was the number one. When I said I'm from Lenox, oh, Eastover. It was unbelievable, unbelievable. So I would get there at 9:30 in the morning. This lady, Ellie, which you remember Ellie, she probably didn't hear well because she had her computer on and she was playing solitaire or bingo on her computer and ding, 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 the thing would be going all day long. So I get there at 9:30 and she was just a receptionist, but she said, Smitty, I'll be back in a little bit. I'm going down to the basement. Okay, pretty good. This went on every day for weeks. I finally had the courage to ask her, Ellie, what's in the basement? What are you talking about? He says, well, every day I get here, you say you're going down to the basement. Oh, yeah, I go to Filene's basement. So she went to Filene's basement every year, And then at Christmas time, Filene's Basement would deliver a gift card to her, thanking her for her patronage of Filene's Basement. So I've met a lot of characters in my time. The staff is incredible. And I look back at Sally, as you know, the state reps can only do so much. The staff really are the ones that kind of do the grinding day to day. But I've made some great friends and colleagues that I cherish to this day. We brainstorm a little bit and a lot, and every person that's ever sat next to me, I said, I've been here 5 years, I've been here 10 years, I've been here 20 years. I have yet to find a single person in this building that ever voted for me on election day. And they said, what are you talking about? The people that hire and fire you live in your district, not on Beacon Hill. So don't ever lose sight of where you came from. And I've seen colleagues come and go because they believed that was the real world on Beacon Hill. They lost track of what goes on back in their own district. And that's why I was proud to come home. It's tiring sometimes to get off the turnpike at 7 o'clock at night and have to be at a selectmen's meeting in Sandusfield to talk about the issue of the day. But that's what I've taken great pride in, of ownership and responsibility. We've taken some good votes, some tough votes. Probably one of my most proud votes in hindsight, my first term, it was, we were debating same-sex marriage. Very controversial 22 years ago, even in the Berkshires. Vermont had done civil unions. People were advocating for civil unions, not full-blown marriage. Elise was a tremendous help to me in this regard. And I called up Richard Lapchick, Dr. Richard Lapchick, who's gotten to be a very dear friend. Elise used to work for him. And he led the American boycott of the Davis Cup tennis matches in South Africa during apartheid. Got to be very dear friends with Nelson Mandela, and was one of only 200 specially invited guests to Mandela's swearing in from all over the world. So I called Rich, I'll never forget this, at 9:30 at night. And I said, Rich, what do you think? This is what's going on in Massachusetts. He lives in Florida now. And he says, Smitty, this is the civil rights, social justice issue of your day. Are you going to be on the right side of history? 45 minutes later, I gave my maiden speech on the floor of a joint session of the House and Senate. And we became the first state in the country to allow same-sex marriage. Marry who you want to marry, love who you want to love. And I feel at that time it was tenuous. I came home the next day, I went into the village snack shop, which was no longer open. And I opened the door because the people that were there were critical of me thinking about allowing this. And I said, oh my God, you're still open. This is incredible. The world did not stop revolving last night, did it? It was the right thing to do. And then for many, many years, Massachusetts was bailing out our local hospitals all across the Commonwealth to the tune of billions of dollars. It was the free care pool. People were using our emergency rooms as their primary care physicians with no health insurance. So the state would come back and spend billions of dollars. We became the first state in the country to have health care for all. Obamacare, Romney care, based on what side of the issue we're on, that was what Massachusetts did. And what Obama and Romney, they pulled out Massachusetts and just put in the United States of America. That was the template. So I've been on the side of some very big historical events that have helped change the course of American politics and service to all. We've been doing a lot of those kind of things as well all throughout my time, but it's time to move on. I have no problems with that at all. I'll let others decide what my legacy will be, other than being the longest serving state representative in the Southern Berkshires. I'll let someone else decide what kind of representative I was, but I tell you, I feel pretty good that we've done some good things. And I would love to answer any questions you guys may have about, I'll give you my opinion of what's going on in Washington or what's going on in the state of Massachusetts as well, because we're seeing a lot of changes. There was a 23-year-old person just elected state representative. And I had this conversation with Ben Downing. He was elected when he was 24, I believe. And there was a young man from Gardner, Massachusetts, who was elected at 23. And the first time I ever talked to him, the guy right next to me became a very dear friend, Steve Pignatelli, who left the legislature after I think 10 years and was just finished serving 10 years as the mayor of Fitchburg. And he came down because Gardner was in that delegation. And I'm looking, first time I ever spoke to him. He's talking to Steve Pignatelli, and I'm looking at him and listening to him. And I finally said to him, "How old are you?" He says, "I'm 23 years old." I said, "What the hell do you know about being a state rep?" "What do you mean by that?" He said, "You ever had a job? You've been married, you've been divorced, you got kids, you know about student debt. You still live in your mom's basement?" And I start peppering him with questions. First time I ever spoke to this kid. He looks at Steve Pignatelli, looks back at me, looks back at Steve. He says, "What's up with this guy?" And Steve looks at me and turns around to John and says, "Well, what the heck do you know?" The fear I have is that I didn't get elected till I was 43 to the State House. These people are getting elected while they're in college. And I really wonder, do you have enough lived experience to tackle some of the big issues that we're dealing with each and every day? Now, here we are 10 years later. John from Gardner has become a very dear friend. It's the only job he's ever had. Fast forward 10 more years, he's now 43 years old, and it's the only job he's ever had. So I want people to get involved in service, but I think 23, my opinion, just my opinion, it's too young. I ran a business. I've been married and divorced. I have children. I know what it's like to have student debt. I had elderly parents. I know what it is to try to keep them at home as long as you possibly can. Yes, I've had to fire people. I've had to hire people. When I was in business, there was times I went without a paycheck because I wanted to make sure my employees got paid. Those are lived experiences that I think are immeasurable, and there's not a vote that I've taken in that legislature in 22 years that I can't reflect back on something in my own life that's helped shape who I am or what my view of the world is. I get worried about the 22-year-old that gets elected who landed a job that pays $60,000 right out of college and thinks he hit the lottery. So I think we need to pay attention to the people that were running for office, and not so much about where they stand on the issues, but what do they bring to the conversation. And I think lived experience is really very, very important. And I'll go back to Steve Grossman, knowing when to leave and know when to stay. I'm leaving at a perfect time for Smitty. Maybe not perfect time for some of you in this room or the government that we represent in the Berkshires, but there's colleagues down there that it's the only job they've ever had, and I'm thinking, you need to leave. But everybody gets elected differently, and our districts are represented very differently as well. So I'll open up to any questions that you guys may have, and I know it's not a shy crowd, so Leo.
Hey, Smitty, you said that the JVs are in Washington now. Do you see the varsities going back in 4 years?
I hope in 2 years with the midterm elections. I don't know. I sometimes get worried about, I'm sorry to be telling so many stories about my father, but these are life lessons that I've learned from him, that every U.S. senator is a multimillionaire. I think 300 out of the 435 congressmen and women are millionaires. Sometimes business people, they go on and make a lot of money, and the only thing left for them to do is get in the history books. How do you get in the history books? Run for public office. Now, Mitt Romney, I came in on New Year's Day, 2003. Mitt Romney came in got sworn in on January 2nd, 2003. I got along very well with Mitt. One-on-one, he was a real gentleman. If a third person came into the conversation, he froze. It was an amazing thing. He's only the second person in the history of America to be a governor of one state and a U.S. senator of another state. He's in the history books. Now, I give him a lot of credit. He was kind of an anti-Trumper. I don't want to get too much into the politics, but as a Republican, he wasn't afraid to speak up. But then he left. So the voices are leaving that are people who are objecting. So I hope in 2 years that people will smarten up. But if you can't raise the money, you can't compete. And I'll tell you a story. There was a gentleman who still owns a condo at Lakeside Condos at Fox Hollow. And I did electrical work for him for years. And he's always wanted me to run for governor. And no, I can't do that. So one year, it was the year that Elizabeth Warren and Scott Brown, who I served with Scott Brown in the House and the Senate, were running. And I saw my friend at the Castle Street Cafe in Great Barrington, him and his wife. And he says, when are you going to run for governor? And I said, oh my God, look at this Elizabeth Warren, Scott Brown race. They're going to spend $20 million. So we had a nice conversation. I went back, sat at the table I was having dinner with, and he came over when he was leaving, and he put a piece of paper in my shirt pocket. He says, don't look at that until I leave. Well, I looked at it immediately. He wrote me a check for $20 million. And in the memo, it said run for governor. No, he doesn't have that kind of money, so I have it framed in my house right now. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that race of a Scott Brown, Elizabeth Warren, between the two of them, they spent over $50 million. So even if I could have raised $20 million, I couldn't have been competitive. Money is ruining politics today. I think we need to have some legitimate campaign finance reform. I would always do my kickoffs on August 31st because that was my birthday. The only fundraiser I'd ever do throughout the whole year was in August. And some days, based on how Labor Day fell, the primary election could have been 5 days later. I try to shorten up the cycle. We're just raising money all the time now. People have multiple fundraisers every year. I have colleagues that have fundraisers every single month between Boston and the Berkshires and Western Mass. So money is ruling the day, and I find that good quality people, if you can't raise the money, you may be the smartest person in the entire state. You won't get elected under our current campaign finance rules. So I have a $20 million check hanging in my house. I remember it was at the National Bank across the street, and I would make my deposits after my fundraiser, and I would turn around from the teller and walk away, and, can you cash this? She went like that. Oh my God, we don't have that kind of money here. I go, what the heck's in that spare tire on the front lawn? What are you guys doing out here? But the point is, money rules the day. I hope that the American people will smarten up in 2 years and try to find some balance of what we need to do. So there's more work to do, David.
Smitty, you mentioned affordable housing and rental units, but also you mentioned building equity. And I was one of the founding members of the Lenox Affordable Housing Committee.
Yep.
And at that time we had the wherewithal of state support for affordable housing ownership. And so we bought the property, which is now going to be used for the municipal center across the Calgary's. We bought that property and it was voted on at the town meeting for affordable housing ownership units. Well, then the state decided no longer to support ownership units, but only rental units.
That's right.
So we had to go back to the town meeting, and for whatever reason, the stigmatism of rental people versus ownership people proved to be unmanageable, and it got voted down.
Yeah.
Do you see the potential of having both types of affordable housing available in the near future?
I think that's the answer, and I think they should be blended together. Let's build a development where there's rentals and home ownership under the same umbrella, the same roof. Let's have low-income housing with moderate income housing all under the same roof. I think that's what we need to have more of, instead of the stigmas of, that's the affordable housing complex. I think that's unfair to the people who actually live there. And you and I rent an apartment there, spend out $3,000 a month, and then our family starts to grow. We still have nothing to show for it. So I think that mix of home ownership and rentals under the same complex will be beneficial. I tried to tell the Secretary of Housing that in my district alone, we're probably, I would say, close to 1,000 units short for housing affordability. Name me one town that would want 1,000 units. But that's what developers love to do. I'm a big advocate of 25 in West Stockbridge, 10 in Alford, 30 in Egremont, 100 in Great Barrington, 10 in Tyringham. It would be a patchwork quilt of housing affordability options, achieving our 1,000-unit objective, but done it scattered about. I've told Secretary Howe from Economic Development that developers always have deep pockets, but very short arms. We never ask them or expect them to kick in their own money. We should expect more of that. You and I go buy a house, the banks want 20% down. The developers, they just have their hand out. So I think we need to change that. We need to mix it up a little bit. But I think home ownership in a mix of that, I think, is paramount. And I'm hopeful that that's what we can do. And that's why I'm so proud of Lenox for being, I think, the first town to actually have a down payment program. That's incredible. We need to do more of that. I wish it was $10,000. Now it's 20. The way real estate market is in Lenox, it could be 50, to be honest with you. But I think we're making it harder and harder for young people to actually afford to live in this town. Some people always want to rent, like I said, but let's have some ownership at the same time. And that's where we're going to change the course of our population. Our population has been dipping because our younger people are moving away. I read the obituaries every day, and I see people that have lived in the Berkshires their entire life who passed away in another state. Because as they got older, their children couldn't afford to leave and come back to the Berkshires, so they moved mom and dad closer to them. So we're kind of eroding this whole population base based on, I think, the housing opportunities. Plenty of job opportunities, but we need safe, clean, and affordable places to live. And that's what we're struggling with right now, all throughout the Berkshires. Clarence.
One of your key issues in recent years has been, many years actually, has been shared services, collaboration among school districts, among communities. Currently, the shortage of first responder EMTs is a key issue. Stockbridge and West Stockbridge have taken some preliminary steps toward combining their first responder teams. How would you assess the progress that's been made and what still needs to be done?
Well, we're getting there. I go back to 1972 when my father was campaigning for county commission. I was, 11, 12 years old. At a candidates forum up in North Adams, and my father said at this forum, look at the Berkshires, 160,000 people. We have 30 towns and 2 cities, 32 police chiefs, 32 fire chiefs, 32 DPW chiefs. If we don't start sharing and talking to our neighbors, we're not going to be sustainable. And this gentleman came up to my father after the forum. He said, Johnny, he says, my friend Joe says you're a great guy, you got my vote, but with your platform, you're never going to win. My father did win. He served there for 20 years. So I've been being a strong advocate for sharing services my entire career. When Roland Miller, our longtime superintendent, retired, and Hank Zukowski, longtime superintendent of Lee, was retired within 6 months, as a selectman, I was able to convene a meeting with the Lee and Lenox school committees. And the first words out of their mouths were, well, we have sports traditions and we have rivalries and this is not going to work. I just saw an opportunity to share a superintendent. 750 kids in Lenox, 750 kids in Lee. Why can't we have one administration? A week later, they came back and I said, I got the sports traditions all figured out. The Lehigh Wildcats will merge with the Lenox Millionaires and will be called the Fat Cats. And they all laughed like you did. But that was nearly 30 years ago. We pushed legislation to share a town administrator, which Chris Ketchen did with the town of Lee when Bob Nason was retiring. I think Chris did an amazing job. I think it proved to me that it can work. Lee was still Lee, Lenox was still Lenox. We were becoming more efficient, saving taxpayer dollars. What a novel idea. We started sharing a building inspector, which now there's talks, we're now up to 5 towns, and we've had meetings, it may go up to 7, 8, or 9 different towns who want to share a building department. So shared services can work. You can still maintain your identity, be more efficient, and save taxpayer dollars. We need to do more of that. EMS, that is the biggest issue right now. That is the biggest issue right now. Lenox is building a $25 million public safety complex, but Lenox is still only 5,000 people. We back up Lee, we both back up Stockbridge. Lee covers the Turnpike, Lee covers Tyringham. We have to do things on a regionalized basis. But Lenox is building a $25 million building. Lee is building a $30 million public safety building. We have to start doing things on a shared basis. It's all about survival. Because going back to my dad, think about 10,000 people working at General Electric, over 3,000 people working at Sprague Electric. We had a couple thousand people working at Crane and Paper in Dalton. We had paper mills galore. Today, our population is 127,000 people. No General Electric, no Sprague Electric. Crane Paper is not even owned by the family anymore, and it's a shell of its former self locally. And there's one paper mill left in Lee, Massachusetts, employing about 150 people. So things are shifting. We need to really rethink how our delivery system is going and what our impact is going to be. We can talk about tax rates all the time. I don't care about your tax rate. I care about your tax bill. You want a cheap tax rate? Move to Martha's Vineyard. $3.50 a thousand. How do they do that? The average home is $4.5 million. So the tax rate really means nothing. It's the tax bill that is impacting people's lives. And I think that's what we need to pay more attention to. I think shared services are the only way to do it. I probably shouldn't say it too much, but you go down south to Florida, you go out in the west and the southwest, you don't hear about select people or city councilors. You hear about county government. You hear about county sheriffs. You hear about county school superintendents. Think about 911. The state of Texas has one primary service answering point for 911. The state of California has 4 for the entire state. Berkshire County, 127,000 people, we're down to 6 primary service answering points. Doesn't make sense. When you hit 911, you could fall on the ground and not say a word. On that computer screen, Dave Clausmeyer, Squirmhorn Park, all the information's right there. I don't care who shows up at my doorstep. I just want to make sure somebody shows up. And I had a buddy of mine who had a heart attack a couple years ago. It's in Sandusfield, Massachusetts. The ambulance was coming out of the Southern Berkshire Ambulance, which is based at Fairview Hospital. 45 minutes to get over there, especially in the wintertime. 45 minutes to get back to the hospital. He says, thank goodness we have Fairview Hospital, because I told the ambulance driver to drop me off at Finnerty and Stevens Funeral Home, because he didn't believe we would ever get to Pittsfield, to the hospital. So we have to look at things very differently and holistically. And I believe, and I still believe, shared services are the way to go. And nobody should be afraid of that. Lenox is going to be facing some very difficult challenges the next couple of years, not only financially, but through attrition and retirement. Fire chiefs, police chiefs, town clerks, town accountants. You can only poach so much from other towns without trying to cultivate people from within. So we stole the town accountant from Williamstown when Charlie Brown retired. She's an amazing person. She told me the other day, I'll be retired in 3 years. Where's the next town accountant going to come from? Where's our next police chief going to come from? Our next fire chief? Our next DPW chief? We can only do so much. We need to start cultivating and working on these things going forward, just to maintain the services that we've been accustomed to. But why can't we share a DPW chief? Why can't we share a school superintendent? Dr. Cohn, and I know I'm going over time, Jeremy, but I apologize. But I remember Dr. Cohn told me years ago, he says, I spend most of my time working with Hank on the budget. Hire principals to do the educational reform in the curriculum in the schools, which means you got to pay more money. You're, in essence, for a school superintendent today, in my opinion, you're hiring a manager. It's a manager. It's not so much on education, in my opinion, any longer. And Bill Cohn told me that 15, 20 years ago. But I think there's opportunities to reinvent our delivery system just so we can maintain our services and maintain our identity. Lenox is a beautiful little town. This will be a magnet for people to come to if we can find some affordability factors. Hospitals need doctors, nurses. Municipal government needs workers of all shapes, forms, and sizes. Our hospitality businesses are in need of help. Not many people remember how General Dynamics even got here, but it came back because of the PCB settlement 25 years ago. And it was Senator Ted Kennedy that was friends with Martin Marietta's CEO, Norm Augustine. And GE was pulling out of Berkshire County, and Senator Kennedy knew that he wanted to keep Pittsfield and the Berkshires as vibrant as possible. And he went to Norm Augustine and said, keep Martin Marietta here in the Berkshires. Well, Martin Marietta is now General Dynamics. And that all came from the PCB settlement. So I could go on for another hour about that, so we can fight things, or we can try to find what benefits we can get out of these things. Imagine the Berkshires today without General Dynamics, who could hire probably 200 or 300 engineers today if they could get them to come here. So we need to form partnerships and provide opportunities with our colleges and universities. And I tell young people all the time, treat every internship as a job interview. You never know where it's going to lead. My daughter's in California because she did an internship on the Dr. Phil TV show. And when she left there in December, and she said, and the Dr. Phil goes, if you graduate in May like you say you are and you want a job, come back and see me. Her and I drove cross country. She worked for Dr. Phil for 2.5 years, who was a tough guy to work for. And I said, honey, start peddling your resume. She started peddling her resume, and they said, you survived 2.5 years with Dr. Phil? When can you start with us? And it opened up the floodgate of opportunities for her, and she's been out there almost 10 years now. But the point is, there's plenty of those kind of opportunities right here in the Berkshires. Some people want to see the bright lights in the big city. There's other people that want to stay home in the Berkshires, and those are the things we try to do as a state legislator all the time. George Haddad started the first in the nation partnership with Toyota USA. These kids are graduating Taconic High School as certified Toyota technicians. How much do you think an auto mechanic at Haddad Motors can make today? I ask that of parents all the time. A good mechanic at Haddad in Lenox, Massachusetts can make $90,000 to $110,000 a year. So when I went to the announcement and there was all the kids were there, I said, think about this, guys. There was one girl in the class as well. 4 years from now, when your high school classmates are graduating college, hopefully in 4 years, maybe saddled with $50,000 to $75,000 in student debt, hoping to find a job in what they went to school for, you could be making $90,000 to $110,000 a year right here with a high school degree. We're driving computers on wheels. Yes, they're still changing the oil and the filters. You pull to the mechanic today, you plug your car in, the computer tells you what's wrong with it. You pull out a circuit board, put a new one in, and done. You can make a good career path, have a good living, and have a good life, making $110,000 a year in Berkshire County and afford to buy a house. There's plenty of opportunities like that. We have a serious shortage of doctors and dentists. I talk to young kids getting out of college all the time. What kind of student debt do you have? Nice young kid graduated from Tufts Dental School. I said, what kind of student debt you have? He says, $500,000. Wow. Would you want to come out to the Berkshires? Now, to buy or to start up a dental office in Berkshire County today could run you anywhere from $1 million to $2 million. So you do that math with $500,000 in debt on top of that. 75 to 80% of our patient care in Berkshire County is Medicaid Mass Health, which is pennies on the dollar. So a young person wanting to come out here to invest $2 or $2.5 million can't afford to do it. So he was going back to Atlanta, Georgia, where he grew up, and was going to open up a shop down there. So there's opportunities there, and that's where I think cities and towns could look at that as an investment from an economic development standpoint. Instead of giving tax breaks to big businesses that are opening up their business or waiving the water and sewer tie-in fees. I'd rather go back to that young dentist and say, I'll pay your dental debt $50,000 a year for 10 years as an economic development opportunity. Because I really believe if we get someone like that out there who puts the roots down, 5, 10, they may meet somebody, may start their own family, buy a house. 10 years later, they're not going to want to start all over again. So for $500,000, we've made a major economic development investment. We could do that with engineers and doctors. So we need to really rethink this whole conversation. And as I leave office, and I'll close with this, Jeremy, and I apologize. There's times I've enjoyed my time in the legislature representing all of you, and I think we've done some good work. But there's also times that I feel I can do just as much, if not more, on the outside. And none of us should be afraid to speak up. That's why I love town meetings. Speak up. You don't have to have this pin on your lapel to show that you're in the state legislature to have an opinion. Don't be afraid to have that opinion, because my father said, talk to as many people as possible. Someone may have an idea that you've never thought of. So share your ideas. I've welcomed them for my 40 years in elected office, and the honor of my life is to serve you as the state representative for the last 22 years. So if there's no more questions, I'll stay here all night, Jeremy, but I think Jeremy's ready to shut the cameras off. But I want to thank Jeremy for what he's been doing for 16 years. I saw the lineup this year, and I was thinking, my God, a distinguished lecture series? What's Smitty doing on that list? But I've been blessed in many ways, and I've been blessed by the friendship and the opportunity that you've given me every 2 years. I've won by more than 46 votes on many occasions, but I've never, ever taken it for granted. So I want to thank you all very much for being here tonight.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Just a quick word about our next distinguished lecture. That'll be in January, and the President and CEO of Berkshire United Way will be here celebrating an important anniversary of the Berkshire United Way, telling us what they do in United Way and what they've managed to accomplish over those many, many years. Please join us for that. And let us finish by thanking Smitty once again so much for a wonderful talk.